Hello and welcome to everyone. I am Florence Léchat, General Secretary at Climate Chance. I'm delighted to welcome you for the sixth debate of the week dedicated to the waste sector. Thank you for our panelists who agreed to join us. We are going to present them just after. Just a short recall that everything is in English and French. The session is recording and then it will be posted online on our website. So if you want to look at it again, or for those who weren't able to participate, perhaps until the end, then you can see everything again. Climate Chance, in a few words, in its association created in 2015, upstream of the COP21. Today it's an international platform aiming to help local collectivities with the help of companies, civil society, and helping to the achievement of objectives of the Paris Agreement. Our mission is, on the one hand, to share information, and you can find all the mapping, the agenda of climate on our site, and the videos as well. The objective is to federate the different actors, and to do so, we are working in coalition per theme. Generally, every year we also organize a summit, Climate Chance Summit, and the last years it took place in Abidjan, then Accra. This year, of course, with the sanitary crisis, we weren't able to do so, and this is why we suggested during this second term a series of online workshops. And then our third mission is to analyze the climate action, and this is the purpose of the observatory. The observatory and its report for 2020 is 250 pages long, French and English, entirely translated, and we present a panorama of our climate actions around the world, the actions around the world, and analyzing the emissions as well. So a great thanks to our panelists today. I will ask them to speak slowly so that our interpreter, Una, can translate properly. And now I will give the floor to Antoine Gillot, who is in charge of research at the Climate Chance Observatory, and he will host these exchanges around the issues. Has the COVID stopped or helped the acceleration of these actions? Thank you very much. My name is Antoine Gillot. I'm in charge of the analysis at the observatory, Climate Chance. I'm going to share my screen with you now so you can see my presentation. And we can see the teachings of the waste sector in 2020. So we analyze trends of the previous year usually, but this year we had to take into consideration this pandemic, which upset everything. And it is also true, of course, for the waste sector, as we will see. To begin this study, we organized our analysis to tell about the sector on a global scale and to identify the initiatives, the trends, the weak signals of the non-state actor, companies, collectivities, NGOs, in terms of waste collecting, gathering, recycling, and prevention as well. Sorry, the connection is very bad. We are lacking data to assess the emissions on a global level. The last report was what a waste 2.0 from the World Bank in 2018, and the results 1.2 GTCO2 in 2016. That is about 5% of global emissions. Another way to assess the impact of the waste sector is through reports, of course, research, and seeing the raw material use, and that is up to 8% over 2015 to 2017, while recovery rates drop. So the number of raw materials were, yes, 8% over 2015-17. And so according to Circle Economy in 2020, while the recovery rate drops are from 9.1 to 8.6%. This graph that you see on screen is a graph that dates from the 2019 report. It comes from the World Bank. So that gives you an idea of the way that waste is managed on the global level. So 1/3 end up in landfills, open sky landfills, and some are buried inland. For 2019, 2020 especially, we have identified two major events which have totally disrupted the market. First, the ban or the closing of the Chinese borders and other Asian countries. So there was a ban of recyclable waste from entering China and other Asian countries since 2017. And that has pushed states to amend the Basel Convention on hazardous waste. So they had to place plastics under a special authorization with stricter regulations. And this had several consequences. A number of states tried to find new destinations to export their waste. And especially European countries, USA, Canada, Australia, addressed to Philippines, Thailand, but also Turkey and other European Union countries to take care of their waste. And then other countries started banning the waste as well. In consequence to that, the number of waste is increasing and the recycling is more difficult, of course. The financing of the collecting activities in the territories in the USA, Canada, encountered a number of obstacles. So it was a loss in terms of revenue, of course, for them. And they had to reorganize the collecting system. Could you please speak slower, Antoine, and start again, because your connection is very troubled. So you're breaking up a number of times. Yes, you're breaking up. I'm going to try to speak slower. We were talking about the Chinese decision to close its borders for recyclable waste, and we identified 4 consequences: the revision of the Basel Convention for hazardous waste, Basel Convention, and we rerouted many waste containers towards other countries. These were exported by Europe, USA, Canada, Australia, and then they sent them to Thailand and other countries, other Asian countries, but they started to reroute them as well. So the ability to take care of this, take in charge the waste that was made more difficult for all these countries, USA, Canada, Australia, Europe, and it corresponded to a decrease in revenue for them. The 4th consequence documented by Interpol is the increase of illegal trafficking of waste in different forms. And there were strategies to try to dodge, to avoid these new regulations, of course. And they tried to attack them to these anti-waste legislations, and the increase of the price of oil was one of the results. There was a massive adoption of anti-waste legislation. The last report for it's 127 countries who adopted the legislation, And the African continent has banned plastic in most countries. Another major event this year, it's of course COVID-19 and the oil crisis that came right after, but it had started already in 2019 with the drop of the price of barrels of oil. And this drop in the oil barrel was at the expense of recycled plastic. As well as for paper ballots. As you can see, we have, as we know, we have figures that we are lacking to have a more global vision, but we have observed an increase of household and medical waste production, but at the same time, a cut of urban waste production in some cities. It is the case in Barcelona with minus 25% and Milan, and COVID-19 has also participated to weaken plastic ban regulations with promotion of single-use items, health safety benefits, and postponed legislations in the US and Australia, namely. There are states that federated to limit the use and consumption of single-use items. These single-use items came back into the debate during the COVID crisis, of course. And so there's work and lobbying that has been done around this. In this context, the role of Climate Chance is to observe the reactions of the non-state actors, which means collectivities, NGOs, civil society. And of course, in 2019, we had already seen certain trends emerging. We are making progress on data transparency. There have been several testimonies from companies in beverage or consumption goods, fast food, restauration, and namely in the transparency of their data. They've made great progress, and their strategies to recycling rather than cutting source production. It limits their strategies to recycling. Therefore, there was so there were 50 companies that were assessed, and none of them got mark A, but there's only one company that committed to reduce its packaging levels. Therefore, the consequence to that of the Chinese decisions and the COVID-19 on companies is that a certain number of industries reorganize their value chain to have more valuable actions to recycle. And in certain areas in the USA, the waste is blocked. It cannot go to China anymore. So we see how, to what extent companies are dependent on other countries for their waste. And there are high-tech companies like Apple, for example, they're developing programs to recycle their products and to better use the rare metals that are inside their devices. For the two other categories of actors we have observed, we have seen that in two countries, there have been very intense debates launched around transformation to essential levers to the waste management. It is the case in Canada, in the provinces of Quebec and Ontario. They have launched reforms to become more operational rather than financial, meaning to invite the companies to find new means after the closure of the borders of countries to recycle their goods, their waste. So There's also systems of deposits where you can deposit your bottles and you receive a financial compensation for that. We have to organize the governance around this, and there's also a system of pay as you go to prevent waste in leading cities from France, Norway, Korea, for example. So the ADEME will speak about the case in France. We also saw very interesting cases in Bergen in Norway, and a great success in Seoul, Korea, for the management of food waste. For the NGOs and citizens mobilization, we have seen that we had started to tell the story of citizens in the Arkhangelsk Oblast in Russia who wanted to stop the waste dumps, and that would prove successful. So they mobilized strongly, and they said, not in my backyard. So that led to other governments to make decisions. And I invite you to read more about this story. It tells a lot about the system in Russia, which repeated this scheme elsewhere in other cities. So we also have noticed a slow down of the pace and scale of waste picking campaigns everywhere around the world because of the lockdown, obviously. But we noticed there were different actions-led campaigns last year. And finally, the right to repair has had an incredible advertising in the US with project bills for law, different projects to repair spare parts of complex products. Certain companies have shown great cooperation, such as Apple or Nintendo as well. But class actions have also been open in the United States and in France against Nintendo, the Switch, during the lockdown, because there were dysfunctionings on some parts, some devices on the joysticks, namely, of these consoles. So these are the great trends of the year. I really invite you to, if you want to look at more details, look at the report, and we will now open the debate. So I want to welcome Françoise Bonnet, Secretary General ACR. We have welcome Sven Sora, Deputy Director for Recycling and Plastics at Veolia, and Dominique Traîneau, who is Coordinator of the Territories Pioneers for Prevention of Waste at ADEME. Welcome to all of you. We are going to try to see how in this waste sector the COVID-19 has perhaps accelerated or jammed the climate actions. So to begin, I would like to give the floor to Sven Sora from Veolia. Hello. We talked about this international waste crisis with a lot of documents during the year. How, in a context where it is becoming increasingly difficult to export recyclable waste abroad, how can collectivities or states are confronted to the weaknesses of the transformation, valorization of the enhancement of the waste? How has Veolia developed localized recycling channels and improved sorting performance on our territories? Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
D'abord, un petit retour
First of all, we'll go
de
back
notre part sur l'impact de la
on the
crise, juste
impact
pour
of the
confirmer
crisis, just
effectivement
to
que
confirm
chez nous, on
that
constate aussi
at
sur
Veolia,
les
we
activités de
have
recyclage
seen
le double
in the
impact d'une part
recycling
sur
activity a double
les matières
impact
premières,
on
sur
the
le prix des matières
raw
premières
materials. The price of raw
qui ont baissé,
materials have
et déjà
decreased,
avant l'apparition du
and
Covid,
even
et d'autre
before
part
the
sur
COVID
le Covid
crisis.
lui-même.
And during the
Il a
COVID
deux effets sur nos activités de
crisis, it
recyclage.
had
D'une
two
part,
effects on
parce
our
que
activity,
dans certains cas, la
because
collecte
in some
sélective n'est plus
cases the
possible
in the
nous avons
collectivities,
un
it's
manque de
not.
gisement
We
de
have
déchets à recycler.
a
Et puis
lot
d'autre
of
part, parce que parfois les entreprises qui
waste
rachètent ces
deposit,
matières
waste
recyclées
fields, reservoirs,
ont dû s'arrêter
and
pendant
they
la crise
had
Covid, comme par
to
exemple le secteur
stop during
automobile.
the COVID crisis.
Et donc,
And
a entraîné
therefore, that led
problème de vente
to a
de
problem of
matières recyclées.
sales of
Il y
the
a ce double
recycled
impact qui a été
materials,
réel,
and this is
mais
a
globalement,
true
le
impact.
recyclage a été quand même
And the
assez
recycling
résilient,
was
puisqu'il a pu,
still
chez
resilient
nous, en tout cas,
because
retrouver
we
assez
were
rapidement des
able
niveaux
to
qui étaient
rapidly reach levels
ceux
that we
qui étaient
used to
attendus
have
pour
or that were
pour l'année.
expected for the year.
Donc, comment créer des filières
So
locales?
how can we create
J'aimerais faire la
local
distinction entre, dans la chaîne du recyclage, la
affiliates,
partie collecte et
local
tri, qui
networks
consiste donc à
for
produire des balles de
sorting
matière à
and
recycler
to
et qui
create
ne sont pas
balls
délocalisables, puisque
of
forcément on
recyclable
collecte
material
localement là où les
for
déchets sont
the
produits, donc
local
ça se
collecting
passe
where
forcément dans le territoire
it
concerné.
has to go
Et
through
puis ce qui se passe
to
ensuite, c'est
happen
la transformation de la
in the
matière, c'est-à-dire on prend les
territory where
balles
it takes
et on en
place. So
fait
we
une matière
take
première.
these
Et
balls and
ça,
transform them
ça peut être
into
délocalisé
raw material again. So this could
économiquement.
be
Et il est
delocalized,
vrai que
of
le
course,
Chinese ban a
but it is true
beaucoup
that the Chinese ban
perturbé
has
ces
totally
mouvements transfrontaliers et que ça a eu un effet de
disrupted
relocalisation, en tout cas
things,
chez nous.
and we had to
Je voulais prendre
relocalize.
l'exemple des
I wanted
plastiques
to
parce
take the example of
qu'il est très
plastics
intéressant à
because it's very
considérer,
interesting to
car
take into
pour le recyclage des
consideration.
plastiques,
For the recycling of
nous
plastics,
constatons déjà depuis
we have
quelques années une
noticed
très
for
forte
several
demande de
years
la
already
hausse
a strong demand
de matières
for the
en
with the
plastique recyclé.
increase of recycled
Forte croissance de
plastic.
volume, ce qui est l'occasion
So an increase in terms of
développer
volume,
l'activité. Et chez
which
Veolia, nous avons
develops the
prévu
activity,
d'ici à
and we have
2023
planned
de doubler
by
notre volume
2023
d'activité
to
dans ce
double
domaine.
our
Donc
activity
c'est
in this
vraiment
field,
l'exemple
and
que la
it is
demande est
the
très forte.
example, an example
Mais
that
par
proves
ailleurs
that the
aussi,
demand
et
is
ça
very
c'est très
strong,
important,
and
une
this is
augmentation
also
de la demande en termes de qualité
interesting,
technique
an
des produits. Les
increase of
grades
the
de
quality
matières
of the
qui sont demandés
product.
sont de plus en plus élevés. Par exemple, on veut
People
pouvoir faire des
want
bouteilles
more
aptes au contact alimentaire, ce qui avant
quality-oriented
n'était pas le cas.
products. It wasn't the
Et
case
ça
before.
nécessite de
And
développer des
this,
nouveaux savoir-faire.
for this, we need to develop
Le
new
Chinese ban
knowledge, new
a donc
know-how.
complètement
The Chinese ban
perturbé
has totally
les
disrupted
filières, les transports
these
transfrontaliers
networks at the
et a
borders
nécessité une
and
relocalisation du
needed to
recyclage. Alors,
relocalize the recycling
chez Veolia,
facilities.
nous avons
At
dans le
Veolia,
recyclage du plastique
for
aujourd'hui
the
30
plastic
usines
recycling today, we
environ
have 30
de
plants
recyclage, de transformation de la matière,
which
qui sont
transform these
basées
materials, and they
essentiellement
are
en Europe
based
et en Asie,
essentially in Europe and Asia.
sur le gisement, c'est-à-dire les produits,
for
les
the
balles que nous recevons sur ces usines.
deposits for these balls that we
En
receive.
pratique, chez nous en tout cas, toujours
In
local.
practice,
Nous n'avons pas
what
chez
we do at
nous ce
Veolia, we
phénomène
don't
de
have this
transport
phenomena of
très longue
transport
distance
for long
qui a
distance
pu être
transport,
observé
which is
dans l'Observatoire de Climate Change.
has been observed by Climate Change Observatory,
Les balles proviennent du
and
pays même
these
où l'usine est installée, où
balls
le recyclage est installé,
come.
ou alors
These
éventuellement en
balls
Europe où
come
les
from
distances sont
other
assez courtes,
countries, or in Europe, distances are
pour ce qui est des
shorter, of
ventes, c'est la
course.
même chose.
But for
Les
sales, it's the
granules de
same
plastique
thing.
que
The
nous vendons
plastic
restent
granules that
locaux, en tout cas à
granulates
l'échelle
that
du
we
pays.
sell.
Et c'est le cas aussi bien en Europe qu'en
It's the case in
Asie.
Europe
Donc,
and in
pour nous,
Asia.
c'est vraiment une
So for us,
opportunité
it has
très
been an
importante de développer des
important
filières
opportunity
locales, puisque
to develop
croissance de volume,
networks
c'est une
locally.
croissance d'activité et donc
It is an
d'emplois à
increase
créer,
of
et surtout des
activity
emplois
for jobs as well,
innovants dans un
and
domaine qui
innovative
touche à
positions
l'empreinte environnementale. Nous sommes réellement en train
touching on the
de développer des
environment,
nouveaux métiers
and
parce
to
que ces grades
there's a need to
techniques
develop
dont je
these
parlais tout à
new
l'heure, qui sont plus élevés
job
qu'avant, nécessitent des
opportunities.
nouvelles
There's a
technologies, nécessitent de
higher demand,
l'innovation.
higher level in
Donc
technology
ça,
that is
c'est
necessary for
notamment en
that.
termes de formation
And in
vraiment
terms
très
of
intéressant pour
training, it is
local.
also very interesting for
Un dernier
local
point que je voudrais
employment.
rajouter
A
là-dessus,
last
c'est
point
que
I wanted to add,
pour favoriser
and to favor
l'emploi local, il faut
local
qu'il y ait des
employment, you
entreprises
need to have
qui
companies
s'engagent à acheter
that commit to
ces
buy
matières recyclées.
these
Parce
recycled
que faire du
materials.
recyclage, c'est produire une
To
matière
recycle
première,
means
et donc il
producing
faut finalement
raw
des
materials, and
utilisateurs, et s'ils
we
sont
need
locaux,
users.
la
If
filière se
they are
développera localement.
local, then the network will
Voilà
become
sur ce thème.
local as well. This is all for me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sven. Now I'm going to turn to Françoise Bonnet to have her vision of things, her perspective. So we talked about the closing of borders with China and Asia, and the waste of northern countries that had nowhere to go, and the impact of the COVID-19 is non-neglectable on the production of waste, although it hasn't been put into figures yet, but we have seen a lot of cleaning campaigns that rose, such as in the Lac Léman in Switzerland. Acerpus is leading a survey for the production of waste of cities in Europe. What are the first results and what are the trends we can observe? Thank you very much, Antoine, and hello, everyone. First, I would like to put into perspective the beginning of the analysis that we carried out with our members. It was a demand from our members because during the first wave, I hope we won't have too many others, we didn't know what to do in the municipalities because we had a direct link between environment and public health. And this is what we had in the beginning. We needed to see how we could ensure this public service to manage it, which was essential in the face of questions such as, can we be contaminated when touching old plastic bottles or containers? And the first research was about how to confront this problematic and help the public service in the collecting and management of waste. What we first noticed very quickly to ensure security, the first observations when confronted to this second wave, of course, the garbage collectors were confronted to a great amount of work, and they were told to only collect residual waste, and this had big consequences on the landfills for the recyclers. And this was a worry. We don't have very precise data yet, so I cannot give you a precise answer, but have we had a direct increase of our waste packaging or single-use packaging? It seems that yes, but there was a balance between, as you said in your report, between household waste and municipal waste. There was a decrease of waste produced from restaurants and bars, for example, because people consumed at home much more. But there was some takeaway food as well, so containers. There was a balance between the two that was found. But now we're trying to see that whether in the composition of household waste, there were important differences compared to before the COVID crisis. What we also noticed is that generally the collecting performances or selecting performances have continued to function well. It was business as usual. And when we were able to ensure collecting at a whole, we noticed that a lot of containers parks were closed. And in certain municipalities, there was an increase of the waste because, as you said, of the masks, namely, so a lot of people threw waste everywhere on the streets, masks, because it was easier for them to get rid of the waste. Sometimes cumbersome waste as well was found on the streets. And in this business as usual, when it was door-to-door collecting as it existed previously, it was easier to continue to do this type of collecting. And people continued to put things on the sidewalk, old pieces of furniture, bags with waste, garbage bags, etc., on a regular basis. An extremely important point that we noticed is the communication. And for communication, we were lucky enough to have social networks to be able to communicate with different citizens on the local level. And it was very important to be able to communicate with citizens, with people about the change in the collecting systems or on their frequency rate. We needed to communicate rapidly with them. Last point I also wanted to mention is that we noticed, of course, an increase of medical waste during the COVID crisis, the first wave. And in some cities, we notice a decrease of household waste, but we need to put that in balance with the municipal waste and an increase of course, an increase of medical waste. And this was problematic at times, namely in Brussels, because they had to adapt quickly and adopt regulations locally, because there were demands for containing quantities that in certain areas they couldn't have big sizes of containers. So they had to modify these regulations very quickly to adapt. Roughly, this is what I can say. We also noticed that where usually there was a mechanobiological treatment of the waste, it was bypassed and things were put in landfills more often, and even residual waste without having a pre-treatment of the waste. And this had consequences in a loss of the deposits, of course. So for the fields. So this is what we have noticed. Thank you very much we will look at this closely. And of course, there are new lockdowns that are possible, and there will be a lot to do to take into consideration everything that has happened this year and stepping back, taking a distance. Now that we have the context, perhaps we can look at the best practices, efficient practices in the different collectivities. And I want to turn to Dominique Traîneau from ADEME on the pioneer territories. We are talking about the upstream actions to reduce the waste. And there are a certain number of practices that you have found very efficient, and these are the common points with the collectivities that perform better in France to prevent waste, for the waste prevention. So, yes, thank you, Antoine. Hello, everyone. It is true that ADEME for 10 years now in France has deployed a policy of waste prevention, and also in 2009. And what we wanted to do was to assess not only the results in the program, but to see what were the most performing territories in terms of waste production, those who produce less, and starting from that, identifying the factors of the success. So this work was possible because on the French level, we have a collective data by the ADEME. It's online. It's a tool of the observatory for waste. And what we have is we have supported our work on the survey of 2017 for the survey. It was made by Ecogeo in line with the Zero S France for the survey. So it is a survey that was done before the COVID pandemic, but it would be interesting to see how the territories, these pioneer territories, have experienced this crisis, and with the degradation of the process of waste. After what have Sven and Françoise said, one of the arguments to reduce the production of waste is we have some territories that are more resilient generally when there's a weak production of waste. And I rapidly come to the results. We have identified 58 territories which produce twice as less as the French territories on average in residual waste. And they produce less in terms of household waste. It means when you add the recycling to the household waste, they produce less in terms of household assimilated waste when you in a lesser way, because the efforts made for the waste reduction have been more on the reductions of OMRs and for the cumbersome waste as well. So there's asbestos that could be taken into consideration as well. So these territories are rural mainly, and to see what happens in the cities, we also have looked at the urban areas, and all these territories are not unevenly spread on the French territories. 3 regions appeared. The Loire Valley region, Franche-Comté. And as I said, these pioneer territories are in rural territories, are very small cities, but never big cities. They are less touristy as well. Let's come to the success factors of these pioneer territories. It is not surprising that what the incentive with money, a financial incentive is a factor of success. Of course, there were previous surveys, but here, when we look at things from 10 years back, we can really say that it is unavoidable, this form of financial incentive. It is not the only measure possible. What we also have noticed is that we needed, in addition to this financial incentive, a certain number of additional measures, namely the reduction of the collecting of the waste. We have noticed that the OMRs are collected every 2 weeks on average, and there was an access to control in the landfills to better see what comes into the landfill and reduce the number of entries. We also can mention awareness raising actions to make people more responsible, users more responsible generally, in addition to information campaigns that are broadly disseminated. It is also important to have a relation of proximity with people and create help locally for people to become ambassadors of waste sorting. There's also a support to individual composting at home. In addition, we also need a political control and actions from the governments who could be triggers to these better actions. I also invite you to take a look at this survey, which is online on the ATEM library. You can look at all the details. We also have identified trajectories which help to show how things are done. And there are, of course, financial and environmental incentives, as I said, but there are others I haven't mentioned on the cost of the waste management. We estimate that for these pioneer territories, the benefits in terms of cost per inhabitant is of 25% lower than in most of the other collectivities. Therefore, for the best of these pioneer territories, there are innovative ways to collect waste. Some of them totally stopped the door-to-door collecting, And for the residual household waste, people could bring their waste voluntarily in a volunteer way. This is an element that we noted down also in the United States. In consequence of the COVID-19, there were new ways of door-to-door collecting that appeared. West Eye site said that 160 municipalities in the United States started using these because of financial difficulties to organize them. Therefore, these door-to-door collecting were made difficult, and people were invited to bring them in a volunteer manner. So, of course, it is less polluting for the environment. I'd like to come back to Françoise Bonnet to widen our scope in Europe. What are the territorial qualities outside of this COVID case? What are the territorial collectivities according to you and your experience, which are doing well in terms of collecting, transporting, and sorting waste? First, looking at our audience, I think we need to recall that in Europe, inside the European Union, since the 70s, for the legislative framework, there have been important things done in terms of waste management with obligations for municipalities, which have led them, guided them, and their policies, their local policies as well. And they were true drivers to reach good results, such as we have now. I also want to underline the fact that the best practices, we always like to put them back into the context, because the territories' configurations were different at the time, and they're not always the same socio-economical context. It's very important to say precisely what we mean when we talk about best practices. They could be elements of a recipe which could be considered as a best practice, but I'm always reticent to say this is a good practice and just copy and paste it. It never really is possible. You always need to say precisely which territory it's working in. And we all know that the key with our legislative context in Europe, it is now that we can collect more humid fractions. We're talking about best practices after 30 years of experience of responsibility for waste collecting in Europe with high performances and covering costs with quality to collect cardboard, plastics, and aluminum as well, or cans. I would say that in terms of best practices, what we can see in Europe for the humid fractions, bio-waste, Milan has been very strong with a very strong level of collecting for bio-waste. I think that was the greatest challenge in the European territories. For all of the systems, we put at disposal different tools. As the previous speaker said, there's not one tool only that can show the differences, but we have a systems in Ljubljana, namely, that is a good example, but it's not the same size of cities as if we want to quote Milan. So this is to take into consideration when you want to compare different practices. Flanders in Belgium has a great policy in terms of park for the containers and public policies in terms of reuse. I believe that the best practices exist where municipalities can make the difference in terms of prevention and try to have less waste production per inhabitant. Odense in Denmark is also very performant in terms of waste, and I believe that something must be said. In Europe, the best performances in terms of waste collection for PET bottles, we have developed systems, whether deposits on a local level, to invite people to bring their bottles back, or that has happened in Denmark as well. It's a system that was put in place, and it is clear that that helps to collect quantities of bottles. What we also have noticed everywhere in Europe, and that is true for French territories, the systems of waste collection via with a financial incentive or a reward, as we can say. It depends how you apply it, of course, but the good citizens will pay less than others. That is truly a factor of success. It is one of the instruments and elements that are put in place in the collecting management waste systems. It is undisputable. Yes, the financial incentives is very important. And the widened responsibility for consumers can be declined in different ways, as it is more currently done in Europe with these systems of responsibility. We can see very well how the collecting levels are increased, and that remains something that is really necessary and interesting to put in place. Globally in Europe, where there are high performances, it is also where there are financial incentives in place. So at least for the recycling area. Maybe it would be interesting to continue observing the reforms that have been put in place in Canada, and they're changing their system of this widened responsibility for producers to a more operational system, inviting companies to act upstream and create these systems to recycle, and to invite people to recycle. I think that this was already said by Sven Sora, but this is why I wanted to mention my answer and saying there's a legal framework which helps to do things. We have seen with the rate and the price of the virgin plastic, we and our network with others and other recycling specialists, there's a minimum recycling content in the European legislation, because the market is, for the moment, as it is, you need incentives to have this secondary market for raw materials, and in order to have other possibilities for these deposits. And it is not always the case for plastic, but it could be for other flows. So we need to be very careful before a market be totally mature. Sometimes we need to have incentives, public incentives and legal incentives, to be able to reach and to objectives and integrate products and to be recycled. You recalled that each territory has a specific context. ACR Plus has very worthy activities, so you can look at what is done in Morocco on the site. Now we will move on to the Q&A session, but our final question, after having wondered about the different types of governances in terms of technology that are available for the waste management, from the conception of the product to the use and recycling of the product, how can we push best practices or for prevention of waste when you are, as Sven Sora, an operator and the heart of your work is to recycle waste? How can you support the different actors to a better management?
Oui, effectivement. Merci Antoine. Je suis très content de
Antoine.
pouvoir parler de ça parce que, en effet, j'entends assez régulièrement que le recyclage pourrait être un prétexte pour continuer à consommer davantage de ressources fossiles et se dédouaner en fait de notre responsabilité à diminuer notre consommation, et je pense que ça, c'est une contre-vérité. Je pense que la réduction des déchets à la source n'est pas le concurrent du recyclage.
That recycled
products are
not a solution necessarily
D'une part, le
to
recyclage
consume
contribue à la
more.
sobriété,
Its sobriety
évidemment,
is very important
il permet de réduire la
because it
consommation
enables to
de
reduce
matières
consumption
fossiles
of fossil
en le remplaçant par des matières recyclées. Et par ailleurs, également, recycler des
to
déchets
recycle the
pour en faire
waste
de la matière première
and to
consomme généralement
make
moins d'énergie
raw material from it again
que
seems
d'extraire et
less
de raffiner une
energy
matière
rather
vierge.
than
Je voyais tout à l'heure un
extracting
commentaire
raw material. So I saw a comment
sur
in the
l'impact
chat
CO2 de la
about
gestion
the
des déchets. De
CO2
ce point de
impact on
vue-là,
the
le
waste
recyclage
management.
permet de diminuer
Recycling
l'impact
helps reduce
CO2
the
global de
CO2
nos
impact
activités.
globally of our
Donc ça, c'est une
activities.
chose.
So
Mais
this is
ça n'est pas
one thing,
suffisant.
but it is
Le
not
recyclage
enough. Of course,
contribue à la
recycling
sobriété,
contributes to
mais
sobriety,
seul, ça ne suffit pas.
but
Je voudrais
taken
vous donner un
alone, it
exemple de
is
ce
not
que
enough.
nous faisons
I'll give you
pour
an example of what we do
participer à la
to
réduction des déchets,
participate
même si
to
ce n'est
the
pas
waste
notre cœur de
reduction,
métier,
even if
évidemment.
it's not our
C'est
core business.
un concept que nous avons
It is a
développé,
concept that we have
nous appelons
developed
Recycling,
and that we called
qui est une nouvelle forme de
Recycling.
déchetterie. Alors, je vais
It is
rendre
a
hommage à
form of
l'ADEME.
land
Dominique, je
waste.
pense,
I want
sera
to
d'accord
say
que
that
la
perhaps
déchetterie, en tout
Dominique
cas
will
telle qu'elle
agree
existe en
that
France, est une
the
invention de l'ADEME,
landfills
je
are
pense, il y
an
a une
invention
trentaine
of
d'années.
ADEME 30
Et
years
nous nous
ago,
sommes permis,
and
sur cette base de
we
la déchetterie traditionnelle, d'essayer d'ajouter quelques
decided
innovations pour
to
la
add some
modernité.
innovations to this
Et
traditional
parmi
landfill
celles-ci, celle qui m'intéresse,
concept, and one that is interesting to me and is dear to
mis en
me
place
and can
à
be put
l'entrée
in
de
place
ces déchetteries
at
recycling,
the
un magasin
entry of
d'accueil
these
du
landfills is a
public
welcome
qui va
desk,
permettre,
which
par
will help,
exemple,
for
d'avoir
example,
un
to
parcours
have
pédagogique pour former
a
les personnes
pedagogical
au recyclage et à la
journey to
réutilisation
help
des
people
déchets.
to know how to
Il y a également un
reuse
espace qui
their
permet
waste.
de
And there's a
déposer
specially
des
dedicated
objets
ways to
réutilisables comme des
deposit
livres, par exemple.
reusable objects
Et
such as
puis,
books, for
surtout, il y
example,
a un espace
and
qui est
also
réservé à des
a
partenaires qu'on peut
special
avoir
place
localement, des
dedicated
associations,
to
des
local
entreprises sociales et
partners,
solidaires qui
companies
travaillent dans la
working
réutilisation des déchets.
in the
Donc, qu'ils
reuse
soient
of
réparent,
waste.
remettent en état des objets,
So
ou alors
whether it
qui
is
parfois
to
font des créations
repair, sometimes they
qui peuvent
repair old
vendre.
objects or they create new objects with the old
Donc,
ones.
nous essayons de promouvoir ce type
And
de
we try to
partenariat. Ce n'est
promote
pas notre
these
métier de
types of
faire ce que font
partnerships.
ces
It is not
associations, ces
our core
entreprises,
business to
mais par
work with
contre, on
these
essaie de
associations,
créer
but
cet
we really
écosystème qui
try to
permet d'avoir en
create
un
an
même endroit
ecosystem which
la
helps
réutilisation
having
des
in
objets
the same
ou
place
leur
the
recyclage.
reuse of
Et en
objects
fonction de la
or
qualité
their
des objets qui
recycling.
nous sont amenés par le public, on
And
peut l'orienter vers l'une ou l'autre de ces filières.
we can,
Et le
depending on the
résultat,
quality of the projects,
il y a
they
aujourd'hui
are
une
sent to
petite dizaine de
one part
recyclings
of
qui ont
this
été mis en œuvre et qui fonctionnent, et on a fait quelques
factory or
statistiques. Le
the
résultat
landfill,
qu'on
sorry, or
constate,
the other.
c'est que le taux de
What we have
recyclage
noticed is that
dans
the
ce
level of
type
recycling in these
de
types
déchetterie est
of
supérieur
landfills is
à ce qui est
higher
d'habitude.
than usual.
On passe
We go
environ
from
40%
about
à 60% de
40%
taux
to
de recyclage.
60%
Ce qui est
of
tellement lié au
recycling
contexte un peu
rate,
de
which is
communication
in line with
autour
the
du
communication
geste que tout
program
le
of
monde peut
the
faire
geste
pour
that
améliorer
the
l'empreinte
gestures that
sur la
everybody
planète
can do
de la
to
gestion des déchets. Et
improve
donc, on constate vraiment
our
une
footprint in
complémentarité,
terms
on
of
constate des
waste.
synergies entre ces deux
There are synergies
activités.
that we try to create between
Donc,
the
c'est finalement pour
activities,
nous qui
and
sommes
in the end,
une entreprise
for
de
us,
recyclage et de traitement
we
des
are
déchets,
a
tout à fait
recycling
positif de
and waste
rapprocher
management company.
ces
It
deux
is perfect
activités.
to bring these activities together. Thank you very much, Sven. We are running out of time, so we are going to try to leave a few minutes to speak, to take some questions from the audience. So in conclusion, Dominique Traîneau, at the ADEME, you mentioned sobriety, you work on sobriety questions. So we are going to talk this afternoon of the textile management and how can we question our needs and meet them without risking rebound effects. So in a few words, it is an emerging topic at the ADEME also. For 20 years, we have put a lot of efforts into renewable energies, efficiency, and we have noticed that today, what we need to do is to go towards sobriety. What is it about? We got interested in this idea, sobriety, for a few years now at the ADEME. And I invite you to take a look at the ADEME library. We talk about different things when we mention sobriety. It can have multiple forms, and this panorama can help identify all of the referring resources. It is interesting because it goes back to the origins of the concept. You see there's philosophy, there are spiritual roots, very old roots and origins of sobriety. And it is, to go quickly, we have another kind of work that has been done called Thinking Sobriety, Penser la Sobriété. It is a research around this notion. And for the moment, we have suggested to explain what we're talking about, to share this concept in a concrete way. I'm going to read it. In a context where natural resources are limited, sobriety consists in questioning ourselves on our needs and satisfying them by limiting the impact on the environment. We must lead to make sure that our means of consumption and ways of consuming our lifestyle must be decreased in the you must question the needs without the rebound effects that you mentioned. You're right. We need to be careful, but at the same time, we have tools at hand. And I'd like to mention a tool that the ADEME has put at disposal, which is called Nos Gestes de Climat, our climate gestures.fr. So on the individual carbon footprint, we know that with the Paris Agreement, we want to go towards zero emissions, or 2 so it's a reflection around transportation, our lifestyle to reach low carbon footprint. And there are all kinds of actions that are suggested, all sorts of things that we have lost with our hyperactive lifestyles. And we need to see how we can do better or do more without impacting the carbon footprint. We can run, we can discuss, we can take time, we can walk in the forest, plant trees, for example. I'm sure it's difficult to translate everything, but I'm sure the translator tried to do a good job. Thank you. Thank you, Dominique, for this note of hope. And of course, consumption is not everything. There are other things to look forward to. And we have time to take just a few questions. After Dominique and Sven, I think, and Dominique and Françoise, we have among the audience a number of people from the African community. Françoise Bonnet, perhaps I will give you the floor to say the last words. You work in Morocco. We talked about how creating circular means to collect waste. There's a question on the artisanal waste collection in Africa. How can we boost these sectors. Do you have a word to conclude? To conclude, I don't know, but in any case, I believe that we absolutely need to integrate and create synergy more between municipalities and the waste pickers, between waste pickers. And these are key elements for the ecosystem and for waste in all of these countries, and to try with them as best possible to have a selective waste picking. Of course, prevention is vital as well, so we need to try to develop more jobs around repairing, for example. And when we talk about the successive phases, to also introduce these pickers, but we need to try to communicate to citizens for them to know better what they're already trying to do. But to create jobs that are dignified, that are real jobs. Otherwise, we go back to precarious situations once again. Thank you very much. So this is a topic with socio-economic fundamental aspects in the waste sector, and the transition to fight against the climate. I'd like to add something. Today, taking into account the global trend, I believe that it is also time to solicit packaging companies to participate to this ecosystem, and we can decline it in the responsibility of producers in different ways, but in all the countries around the world, a can of a drink is the same product in Europe as everywhere in Africa, for example, and it must be collected and put back into the circuit in the country where it was put on the market. And we must bear this in mind. Thank you very much, Françoise, Dominique, Sven. Maybe one more word to conclude about what you want to bear in mind about the report. Françoise, the climate report. Sorry, the sound was very bad and I didn't understand your question. I'm sorry, my connection is really weak. I wanted to know in one word what you will keep in mind, what you'll remember of the climate report this year. I believe that we need to hold the line. There is a bigger need. We must recycle, collect waste in a better way, and this collecting and treatment of the management of waste is these are crucial services for municipalities. We must continue to do things, to work on them, and to put all the actors of the value chains, confront them to their responsibilities, and all the stakeholders with their solutions, whatever the territories need to continue to analyze and ask questions, always taking into account the specificities of the areas. But we mustn't lose, we must hold on strong and keep doing what we're doing. Sven, a few words.
Très brièvement, pour moi, c'est beaucoup d'espoir parce
que je pense qu'on est en train de développer de nouveaux métiers très innovants et qui favoriseront la réduction de notre empreinte environnementale. And good for the future. Dominique? So I'm going to follow what my predecessors said, what my two fellow spokespeople said. I want to say that the performance contract that we offer by the ADEME helps these companies to manage waste, and it's also addressed for non-governmental actors in the territories to have a contract for better performance. And with the same objectives in mind, we had before one sign prevention, and we want everyone to be moving ahead in the same direction. And this is what we've seen, that things are moving for a few months now, and there are very high signals of hope. Thank you. I want to thank all our partners, without whom we couldn't do the work we've been doing to identify the actions that are led. We want to thank them. And I thank all the speakers today, the participants who agreed to be present in this debate today. And I hope that my connection wasn't too bad. I would like to thank all our participants, and I invite you to join us this afternoon at 3 o'clock for further debates. It is this time on the climate report on clothing, textile industry. And thanks you to our interpreter. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.